The galaxy had known war for 700 cycles. The Krith, a reptilian species with 4 arms and a hive mind, had conquered 12 star systems. Their soldiers moved as one, silent and deadly, their scales reflecting the cold light of dying stars. Against them stood the Galactic Union, a coalition of 40 species, each contributing their best warriors. There were the Vel, 8-foot-tall mantis-like creatures who could slice through armor. The Boran, bear-like giants who carried plasma cannons as if they were toys. And the Silic, quick and clever amphibians who could breathe in vacuum for short periods. But the Union had one species that no one spoke of. One species that was so rare, so mysterious, that most aliens thought they were a myth. Humans. The war had reached a turning point. Krith fleets were pushing toward the Union capital world, Ethereer. Defenses were crumbling. Millions of soldiers had already fallen. The Union Council, desperate, had activated every reserve unit, every lone operative, every forgotten outpost. Among those recalled was a man named Corporal Elias Vance. He had been stationed alone on a remote monitoring station near the Galactic Edge for 3 years. His job was simple: watch for Krith scouts and report. He had seen nothing but static and space dust for 1,000 days. When the recall order came, he packed his gear and waited for transport. The ship that picked him up was a battered Union troop carrier called the Last Hope. It carried a mixed unit of 200 soldiers from a dozen species. Elias was the only human. The commander, a Vel named Zorix, glanced at Elias's file and made a snap judgment. Standard infantry. Light armor. Kinetic projectile weapon. No neural link. No energy shield. Deploy him to the rear support lines. Zorix didn't bother reading the fine print. He saw human and assumed it was some minor species from a low-gravity world, good for carrying supplies and digging trenches. He had never heard of Earth. No one had. Humans kept to themselves, avoided galactic politics, and only offered their services as observers, never as soldiers. That was the official story. The truth was very different. Elias didn't correct him. He had learned long ago that aliens underestimated humans. It was easier that way. He sat quietly in the corner of the drop bay, checking his rifle, an old M97 kinetic carbine, nothing fancy, and waited. Around him, the other soldiers sharpened energy blades, calibrated plasma casters, and linked their minds to the hive network. They looked at Elias with pity or indifference. One Boran soldier grunted, "Support line. Good place for a soft skin." Elias smiled faintly and said nothing. The battle for Ethereer began at dawn, ship time. The Krith dropped from orbit like falling teeth, millions of them, their scaled bodies slamming into the planetary defense shields. The shields held for 12 minutes. Then they collapsed. The ground war started immediately. Union forces were spread thin across 3 continents. Zorix ordered his mixed unit to defend the Calder Valley, a strategic choke point leading to the capital's main power generator. If the Krith took the generator, the entire planetary defense grid would fail, and the capital would be defenseless. Elias was assigned to the rear support line, 2 kilometers behind the front. His job: unload supply crates, carry ammunition to forward positions, and help the medics. He did his work without complaint. But he also watched. He watched how the Krith fought patient, coordinated, like a single organism. He watched how Union soldiers died brave, but predictable, reliant on technology that the Krith had learned to counter. Plasma weapons. The Krith had adapted reflective scales. Energy shields. The Krith used sonic disruptors to overload them. Neural links. The Krith could jam them with psychic static. The Union was losing because they had forgotten the oldest rule of war: adaptability beats technology every time. By the second day, the front line had collapsed. Krith forces broke through the Calder Valley's northern ridge and began swarming toward the rear positions. Panic spread. The Boran heavy units were overrun. The Vel command structure fractured when Zorix's neural link was scrambled by a Krith Ps attack. Soldiers ran in every direction. Medics abandoned the wounded. The supply depot where Elias worked became a target. Krith warriors, hundreds of them, poured over the ridge and into the valley. There for arms held wicked bone blades and sonic rifles. Their eyes, black and empty, saw only prey. Elias watched the aliens around him flee or fall. He did not run. He had spent 3 years alone on that monitoring station, and in that time, he had not just watched static. He had studied. He had analyzed every Krith engagement for the past decade, looking for patterns, weaknesses, tells. The Union thought the Krith were unstoppable because they were a hive mind. Elias saw the opposite. A hive mind is only as strong as its signal. Disrupt the signal, and the hive becomes a swarm of confused animals. He picked up his old M97. It was not fancy. It fired 7.6 mm tungsten slugs at subsonic speed primitive by galactic standards. No energy bolts. No seeking projectiles. No explosive payload. But that was exactly why it would work. Krith scales had evolved to reflect energy weapons and dampen kinetic impacts from plasma. But they had never faced a simple, dense, high-velocity piece of metal. Their reflective scales worked by converting energy into heat. A tungsten slug carried no energy. They could convert it was pure mass and momentum. It would punch through their scales like a needle through wet paper. The first Krith warrior charged at Elias. It was 20 feet away, bone blades raised, mouth hissing. Elias raised his rifle, exhaled, and fired 3 shots. The first slug hit the Krith's chest scale. The scale cracked. The second slug buried itself in the flesh beneath. The third slug exited through the Krith's back in a spray of black ichor. The warrior stumbled, confused, then fell. Its 4 limbs twitched and went still. Around it, the hive mind felt the death ripple through the network. For a fraction of a second, the other Krith hesitated. That was all Elias needed. He moved. Not like a soldier. Like a predator. He had no neural link. No energy shield, no fancy armor. Just boots, fatigues, a helmet, and a rifle. He ran toward the swarm instead of away. He fired again and again. Each shot was precise, economical. He aimed for joints, eyes, and the soft tissue connecting the Krith's second set of arms. He reloaded in under 2 seconds, a skill drilled into him during training no alien had ever seen. The Krith tried to adapt. They spread out, tried to surround him. But without the hive mind's constant guidance, each warrior became individual, hesitant. Elias exploited that ruthlessly. He feinted left, fired right. He dropped to one knee, let a bone blade swing over his head, then shot the warrior in the throat. He dodged a sonic blast by rolling forward, came up inside the weapon's minimum range, and put 3 rounds into the Krith's belly. 30 Krith lay dead in less than 2 minutes. The rest of the swarm, now leaderless as the hive signal fractured, began to retreat. Elias did not chase. He stood in the middle of the carnage, breathing hard, and reloaded one last time. Around him, surviving Union soldiers stared in disbelief. The Boran who had called him a soft skin was on the ground, wounded, watching Elias with wide eyes. The Vel medics stopped running. The Silic scouts poked their heads out of cover. They saw a lone figure, in plain gray fatigues, standing knee-deep in the bodies of the galaxy's most feared warriors. And they realized something. They had no idea what this creature was. Commander Zorix, his neural link still sputtering. Limped toward Elias. His mantis-like face showed something alien emotions rarely displayed. Awe. What are you? He asked. Elias turned. His face was calm, almost bored. He wiped black blood off his rifle and said, I'm human. And I'm not support infantry. I'm a scout. But you didn't read my file, did you? Zorix accessed the file properly for the first time. His antennae went rigid. The file was not classified, but it was buried in a section most commanders ignored. Special Operations, Invasive Species Response. It listed Elias's real qualifications. 20 years in the human military, though he looked 30. Service in 3 undeclared wars no alien knew about. Survival training on 17 death worlds, including Earth, which the file described as a Class 12 death world, the most dangerous category in the galactic database. And a note in bold red letters, this operative is not to be deployed in direct combat except in extinction-level emergencies. Human physiology, psychology, and combat doctrine are incompatible with standard Union tactics. Do not engage. Zorix read the note 3 times. Then he looked at Elias. Why didn't you say something? Elias shrugged. You assumed I was ordinary. I let you. Assumptions kill armies. He looked toward the ridge where more Krith were gathering. The hive mind is reorganizing. They'll be back in 20 minutes. This time with their leaders, the Queen's voice units. Those are the ones that control the signal. Kill them, and the whole Krith force on this continent goes feral. Zorix blinked. How do you know that? Elias pointed at the dead Krith around him. I've been studying them for 3 years. You've been fighting them for 700 cycles. I know them better than you because you fight with technology. I fight with my brain. The next assault came as predicted. The Queen's Voice's larger Krith, with ornate crests and psychic amplifiers growing from their skulls, led the charge. There were 7 of them, each guarded by 100 warriors. The Union survivors had regrouped into a defensive perimeter, but their morale was shattered. They looked to Elias. He did not give a speech. He simply checked his rifle, pulled a knife from his boot, and said, "Cover me." Then he ran straight at the Queen's Voices. What followed defied belief. Elias did not fight like any soldier the Union had ever seen. He fought like a force of nature. He used the terrain, rocks, craters, even the bodies of dead Krith as cover and weapons. He threw a rock to distract one guard, then shot another. He slid under a sonic blast, stabbed a Queen's Voice in the throat with his knife, and used its body as a shield. He moved so fast and so unpredictably that the Krith's hive mind could not track him. Their coordinated attacks became frantic, random. The more he killed, the more the hive's signal fractured. By the time he reached the 5th Queen's Voice, the remaining Krith were fighting each other in confusion. Elias killed the 5th with a single shot to the eye. The 6th tried to flee. He chased it down and broke its neck with his bare hands, a technique that made the watching Borin vomit. The 7th Queen's Voice turned and faced him. It was twice his size. Its psychic amplifier glowed red. It spoke in broken galactic common. "What? Art you?" Elias walked toward it, rifle empty, knife lost to engagements ago. He said, "I'm what happens when a Deathworld species learns to cooperate." He punched the Queen's Voice in the throat, crushed its windpipe with his knee, and watched it drown in its own blood. The battle for Etheria turned that day. Without the Queen's Voices, the Krith hive fractured across the continent. Union forces, now led by Elias's example, counterattacked with a ferocity they had forgotten they possessed. The Krith retreated to their ships and fled the system. The war did not end, but the siege of Etheria was broken, and the galaxy learned a new word: human. After the battle, the Union Council demanded a full report. Zorix submitted a document that began with the line, "We mistook a human for an ordinary trooper. That was our gravest error. And our greatest luck." They asked Elias to train their soldiers. He refused. They offered him a promotion. He declined. They asked him to reveal human military secrets. He laughed. "There are no secrets," he said. "We just don't give up. And we don't need fancy weapons to win. We need grit, brains, and a reason to fight. You gave me a reason. My species is alone in this galaxy. If the Krith win here, they'll find Earth someday. I couldn't let that happen." The Council did not understand. They never would. They measured power in technology, numbers, and resources. Humans measured it in will. That was the difference. That was why, when the Krith finally did find Earth 300 years later, they took one look at the planet's Death World classification, at its history of constant war, at the pale blue dot that had produced a species capable of surviving anything, and they turned around and never came back. Elias Vance returned to his monitoring station. The war continued without him, but every soldier on Etheria remembered him. They told stories: the lone human who fought like a demon, who killed Queen's Voices with his bare hands, who never ran. The stories grew exaggerated over time. Some said he was immortal. Others said he was a myth. But the Krith knew the truth. They had seen him, and they had felt, for the first time in 700 cycles, the cold hand of fear. Years later, a young Val officer asked an old Borin veteran, "What's a human?" The Borin, scars crisscrossing his face, sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "A human is what happens when a species refuses to lose. They are not the strongest. They are not the fastest. They are not the smartest. But they are the most stubborn thing in the galaxy. And stubborn beats everything else in the end." The young Val wrote that down and submitted it to the Union database. It became the official entry for human in the Galactic Encyclopedia of Sentient Species. And at the very bottom, in small letters, it added, "Do not engage. Do not underestimate. And for the love of all stars, do not call them ordinary." The Krith never forgave themselves for that day. Their hive mind, once perfect and absolute, now carried a scar, a memory of a single creature in gray fatigues, standing over the bodies of their queens, asking for nothing and giving no quarter. They tried to erase the memory. They tried to rationalize it. They blamed equipment failure, environmental factors, bad intelligence. But every Krith who had been on Ethereer knew the truth. They had met a predator from the Death World, and they had survived only because the predator chose to let them run. Elias never spoke of the battle again. He sat in his remote monitoring station, watching static and space dust, and occasionally smiled. He knew the truth that the galaxy was only beginning to learn. Humans were out there, watching, waiting. And they were anything but ordinary.